All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a case from India, Arnesh Kumar v. State of Bihar. It's a 2014 case, and it really makes you think about, well, how do you balance protecting people while making sure the legal system is actually fair?
Yeah.
We're lucky enough to have excerpts from the Supreme Court's judgment on this one, so we're going right to the source.
Absolutely, yeah.
This one gets pretty intense, so buckle up.
It really does. I mean, this case sort of gets to the heart of a problem that we see a lot. You know, laws that are passed with the best of intentions, but then they end up being misused.
Oh, absolutely. So at the center of this case, we have a husband, right? And he is accused of dowry harassment by his wife.
Right.
He was facing charges under Section 498 of the Indian Penal Code, as well as Section 4 of the Dowry Prohibition Act. And he was trying to get something called anticipatory bail, which means, like, trying to avoid going to jail before a trial even starts.
Right, right. And to understand this, you have to know that dowry harassment is a serious issue in India. And Section 498A, this was put into place to protect women from this kind of abuse. But what the Supreme Court found is that in a lot of cases, the law was being misused.
Oh, wow. It's like a law designed to protect people is actually being used against them in a way. That's disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely. The judgment even cites a report called Crime in India 2012 Statistics. And the numbers they're striking. I mean, there were so many arrests under Section 498A, and a significant percentage of those arrested were women, relatives of the accused men.
Oh, wow.
And even more alarming, while a lot of cases went to trial, very few of them actually resulted in convictions.
So you have lots of accusations, but not a lot of convictions. That does sound like something might be a little off.
Exactly. And the Supreme Court seems to have picked up on this, that suggested maybe a lot of these arrests weren't justified in the first place. They actually called out this whole arrest first, think later attitude. They didn't mince words. There's a quote that really stands out. They said, "Arrest brings humiliation, curtails freedom, and casts scars forever."
Wow. That's powerful. That really gets to the, lasting impact that something like an arrest can have on a person, even if they're later proven innocent, right? It seems like the court's kind of saying, okay, we know dowry harassment is a problem, but we also have some serious concerns about how the legal system is responding to it. So what did they actually do? How did they try to address this?
Yeah. Well, they didn't just point out the problem. They actually put some very specific guidelines in place when it came to arrests, and they pointed to safeguards. They were already, part of the law, but maybe were being overlooked.
Got it. So let's get into those guidelines. I'm guessing they have something to do with Section 41 of the Criminal Procedure Code?
You got it. Yeah, the court pointed right to Section 41, which, it basically outlines when an arrest is actually justified, especially when you're talking about offenses that carry a maximum sentence of up to 7 years, which is what we're dealing with in these dowry cases. So they said, look, police can't just arrest someone simply because they've been accused. They really need to consider, is this arrest actually necessary? To prevent some further crime, to protect evidence, to make sure the accused shows up in court, or even to make sure they're not, going to try to tamper with witnesses or something like that.
So they're bringing back that element of thoughtful consideration, right? An arrest should be like a last resort, not an automatic first step in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, exactly. And they went a step further. To make this more concrete, they said, look, police officers have to write down their reasons for making the arrest. Document it. It's about accountability. They can't just make these arrests lightly.
Makes sense. So that probably makes officers think twice before making an arrest. So it's not just on the police, though, right? I mean, the judgment also talks about the role of magistrates.
Yeah. Right. The court emphasized that the magistrates, these are the judicial officers, right, who authorize detentions. They have a big responsibility here. They said they can't just rubber stamp an arrest request. They have to really scrutinize it, make sure there's a solid reason for that arrest based on what the police are actually presenting.
It's like a checks and balances kind of system, right? Where nobody has too much power over the other. I like that.
What about the accused person? Do they have any kind of recourse, before they get arrested?
Yeah. That's where Section 41A of the Criminal Procedure Code comes into play. This section basically says that in many cases, the police should first issue a notice to appear before they arrest someone. It's like, okay, instead of just slapping on the handcuffs, there's a chance for the person to cooperate without being detained.
They can respond to the accusations, tell their side of the story, maybe provide some evidence and work with the investigators. Obviously, if they just ignore the notice or, they try to skip town, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right, of course. But yeah, it seems like at least the court's saying, hey, not everyone who gets accused is automatically going to run away or obstruct justice.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about these specific guidelines for arrests, right? But it feels like this case is about something even bigger. It's about making sure the process is fair for everybody.
You got it. It's not about letting guilty people go free. It's about making sure everyone is treated fairly under the law.
Right. And this wasn't just about one specific law either, right? I mean, the court's decision had implications for a whole bunch of offenses.
Yeah, for sure. The guidelines they put forward, especially those related to Section 41, those actually apply to any offense with a maximum sentence of up to 7 years. So we're talking about a pretty wide range of crimes here, not just dowry harassment.
Wow, so this could impact a lot of people facing all sorts of charges. It really does seem like the court was saying, hey, maybe we need to rethink our whole approach to arrests in a lot of cases.
Exactly. They were pushing for a more careful, thoughtful approach across the board. They were saying, look, an arrest should be a last resort, not the automatic first response.
Makes sense. But here's the big question. Did this judgment actually lead to real change on the ground? Like, did the police and the lower courts actually start following these guidelines? Did things really shift?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Legal experts and activists have been debating this ever since the Arnesh Kumar judgment came out.
I can imagine. A judgment from the highest court is one thing. But to actually change how the entire legal system operates, especially in a country as big and complex as India, I mean, that's got to be a huge challenge.
Absolutely. And you have to remember, we're talking about deeply ingrained practices, routines that have been followed for years and years. It's not going to change overnight.
Right. So have there been any studies or reports about what actually happened after the judgment?
Yeah, there have been a few. Some studies suggest that arrest rates actually did go down for certain offenses after the Arnesh Kumar judgment.
Okay, so that's a good sign, right? It seems like the judgment had at least some measurable impact.
Yeah, it's encouraging, for sure. But there's also been pushback. There have been reports of the guidelines not being followed consistently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some people argue that the police are still too quick to arrest people, especially in cases involving domestic disputes.
Yeah, those cases can be really tricky, because it often comes down to one person's word against another.
Exactly. And it can be hard to gather concrete evidence in those situations.
So it sounds like a mixed bag, right? Some progress, but also some ongoing challenges.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, and we've got to remember, right? India is a diverse country with different regions and different social norms. I wonder if those things play a role in how the guidelines are applied.
Absolutely. That's a really important point. It's very possible that the implementation of these guidelines varies depending on where you are in India.
It would be interesting to see if there's any research on that. Like, do certain regions have better track records than others when it comes to following the guidelines?
Yeah, that's a great question for further research.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the legal side of things. But at the end of the day, these aren't just abstract concepts. We're talking about real people's lives. Are there any stories, any examples of people who were directly impacted by the way this judgment has been applied?
That's a good question. And honestly, it's hard to find clear-cut examples. You see, the way legal cases are reported, it's not always easy to track the specific impact of a judgment like this.
Yeah, I can see that. It's hard to connect those dots sometimes, but we can imagine, right? On the one hand, maybe there's someone out there who was spared from an unnecessary arrest because the police actually followed the guidelines.
Right. And their reputation wasn't tarnished. They didn't have to go through that whole ordeal.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, there might be someone who had a legitimate complaint, a real case of abuse. But maybe the authorities were too hesitant to act because they were afraid of violating the guidelines.
It's a tough situation. It highlights how even well-intentioned reforms can have unintended consequences.
It's about finding that balance, right? Protecting individual rights while also making sure the system can actually respond effectively to crime.
Exactly. It's a constant challenge. And it's a conversation that's happening not just in India, but in legal systems all around the world.
So true. So, for our listener who's been hanging on every word, what's the big takeaway here? What should they be thinking about as we wrap up this discussion?
You know, I think the key takeaway is this. The Arnesh Kumar case is a powerful reminder that any legal system, no matter how well-intentioned, has the potential to be misused. We have to constantly be questioning, constantly be looking for ways to make things fairer.
I like that. It's not about finding the perfect answer. It's about that constant process of improvement.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that legal judgments, like this one, are not the end of the story. They're just one step in an ongoing process.
And it's a process that we can all be a part of, right? It's not just about lawyers and judges. It's about all of us being informed, engaged citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. The more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we are to advocate for change.
So where do we go from here? What are some things our listener can do if they want to delve deeper into these questions?
Well, there's so many paths to explore. They could start by researching how the Arnesh Kumar guidelines have actually been implemented. Have there been any follow-up studies? Have there been any changes to the law since then?
Good idea. And they could also look into how other countries have tackled similar issues. Are there any lessons we can learn from their experiences?
Exactly. Comparing and contrasting different legal systems can be really eye-opening.
And I always encourage people to think about the human impact of these issues. Try to find those personal stories, those real-life examples that show how these legal decisions play out in people's lives.
Those stories can be so powerful because they remind us that behind all the legal jargon, behind all the statistics, there are real people who are being affected by these decisions.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the specific details of the Arnesh Kumar case to those broader questions about justice and fairness. It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has.
And before we go, I want to leave our listener with one final thought.
Okay.
We've been talking about this balance between individual rights and the need for effective law enforcement. But what does that balance actually look like? What does a truly fair and effective justice system look like?
That's a question for the ages. And it's a question that doesn't have a simple answer. It's something that we, as a society, have to constantly be working towards.
It's about that ongoing dialogue, that constant striving for a better system.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's almost like, how do we make sure the system protects people without, becoming too heavy-handed? But sometimes those big questions, they can feel kind of overwhelming, like, what can one person really do?
Right.
So let's bring it back down to earth. What can our listener, what can they actually do to engage with these ideas, on a personal level? What can they do?
Well, it's easy to feel like these huge problems, these systemic problems, are just totally out of our control. But there are actually quite a few things that individuals can do to make a difference.
Okay, so give us some concrete action items. What can people do?
Well, first off, stay informed. Follow the legal developments, read analysis of cases like this Arnesh Kumar case, pay attention to how these issues are playing out in your own community.
Right.
Knowledge is power. The more you know, the better equipped you are to actually advocate for change.
Yeah, become a more informed citizen. Be aware of what's going on. I like that.
Yeah.
What else?
Support organizations that are working on criminal justice reform. There are tons of groups out there, both in India and, all over the world, that are fighting for fairer laws, better police practices, and stronger protections for individual rights. So donating to those organizations, volunteering your time, even just spreading the word about the work they're doing, that can have a real impact.
Yeah, it's a reminder that, we're not alone in this. There are experts and activists out there who are dedicating their lives to making the system more just. And just connecting with those groups can be really powerful.
Right, exactly. And also, don't underestimate the power of just having conversations about these things.
Yeah.
Talk to your friends and family, colleagues. Talk about these issues. Yeah. Share what you learned from this deep dive. Share what you learned about Arnesh Kumar and the challenges that it highlights. The more we talk about these things, the more we kind of normalize these conversations and we bring them into public consciousness more.
It's about breaking down that silence, or that feeling that these issues are too complex or too controversial to even talk about.
Right.
The more we talk, the more we learn, right? And then the more we can collectively start working towards solutions.
Exactly. And, if you feel really strongly about a particular issue, don't be afraid to reach out to your elected officials. Let them know what your concerns are, advocate for specific policies, hold them accountable for their decisions. Remember, you have a voice.
Yeah.
And it deserves to be heard.
Such good advice. So stay informed, support the organizations that are out there doing the work, talk to your friends and family, and actually engage with your elected officials. I love that. It's change starts with us, right? With each of us taking action in our own little way.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture,
Yeah.
the sweeping legal precedents and all these systemic challenges. But real change, it often happens incrementally through the efforts of, lots of individuals who are passionate about making a difference.
I love that. So we've come to the end of our deep dive on Arnesh Kumar v. State of Bihar. I feel like we've covered so much, from those really specific details of the case to those bigger principles that it represents, you know.
It's been a pleasure. I always enjoyed diving into these complex issues.
Likewise. And to our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this intellectual journey. I hope you learned something new, and maybe you had a few aha moments along the way, or even felt inspired to go and explore these issues further on your own. Until next time, stay curious.